Hello and welcome back to another one of our interview series. I'm so pleased to have with us today Karen Bunnell, who is a mediator, co-parenting coach, and a four-time author who practices in Washington, USA. Karen has worked for over 30 years with couples and families facing transition, loss, growth, and change. One interesting fact about Karen, she loves to go hiking with her camera in a national park. That sounds glorious, doesn't it? Thanks so much for joining us, Karen.
Absolutely my pleasure. And I will say that is my happy place when I'm not working with families that are restructuring. Please just give me my iPhone camera or little aim and shoot and put me on a path. And I am one contented gal, that's for sure.
You know, isn't that true? That sounds so relaxing and so embracing of nature and the outdoors.
It is, it is. You know what's sort of interesting about being out in nature with a camera is
Mhm,
that you see things differently, or at least I do. And
mhm,
so I like the pausing, the capturing. And maybe it's a little bit like working with people that you have to
mhm,
pause with them, you have to listen, you have to capture. And so there's
mhm.
something similar about it.
Isn't that so true? Isn't that so true? So today, Karen and I are going to be talking about parenting plans. And in specific, we're going to be looking at what the heck is a parenting plan, how to develop one, and why it's so important to the effective co-parenting relationship on a go-forward basis when families are restructuring into two homes. So let's get going.
I'm
So,
ready.
so let's start with that foundational question. Karen, what the heck is a parenting plan?
You know, the parenting plan, you use the foundational question, and I will say it's the foundation for your co-parenting relationship, which is it's the undergird of how the two of you are going to raise your child or children across two homes. Now, if we're going to be raising children together, but we're living apart. And so your parenting plan really provides the foundation for and the structure for the rules for the road, if you will, about how we're going to do that in the most skillful way possible, as well as how do we ensure that our kiddos get their needs met, problems get solved, and that they have a strong and engaged relationship with both of us, because
Mhm.
that's what's important.
That's a great answer. And, you know, I would even add to it by saying the way I often define a parenting plan is it's a bit of a rule book. So think of it as though you're, playing a board game and you've got a rule book that both of you agree to follow the particular rules of the game. And that game is the game of co parenting in two homes. And so it's really a guidebook for families as well, I would add.
I absolutely agree with that. And here's the thing I always say to parents, skillful co parenting has very little to do with how you feel about each other. I know that's kind of confusing because people often think of co parenting requires that I like you, and it doesn't require that at all. What it does require is a really well written parenting plan, because
Mhm.
that parenting plan is the rules of the game, the rules of the road, if you will,
Mhm.
as well as the structure that's going to allow us to do this skillfully. And that's what's important is the skills are part of what's outlined in your parenting plan, as well as the structure of how we're going to share these kiddos
Mhm.
and help them grow up.
Yeah. And you know, it's interesting. There's lots of different ways to develop these parenting plans. Often parents will very informally talk with each other. I call this the kitchen table approach, but there's lots of different ways to get professionals involved. There's, you know, on the one end of the spectrum, there would be the kitchen table approach. On the other end of the spectrum, there's the court system, which can help to really to create a parenting plan. There's lots of different professionals that can get involved. There's lawyers, there's mediators, there's coaches. You really advocate for parents to create parenting plans of while avoiding using the court system to create those parenting plans. Can you give us our viewers a little idea of why that's so important and what your philosophy is around that?
Absolutely. Uh, There's a place. Let me start by saying there's a place for the court system. And I want to be very clear about that. When things are not safe, when somebody's mental health is very compromised and they're unwilling to get help, someone's addictions are active and out of control and they're not interested in dealing with that in a health restoring way, then the courts are there to provide safety and protection for children and sometimes for a co parent. So I
Mhm.
want to be clear, there's a role for the courts. But for most of us, most of you who are listening, you have the skill and ability with enough support and guidance to actually co-create a parenting plan. And that's our ideal. That's a kind of our North Star, is that
Mhm.
together with the help of, excuse me, whatever level of experts you might need, uh, that when you co-create a parenting plan, then you know why you've come to the decisions that you've come to. You've done that by agreement, and it's much easier then to accept what you've done with understanding and implement that parenting plan with skill. It's difficult when it comes to raising your children to have some third party, a judge, a
Mhm.
court, even your attorneys on your behalf, handing down a parenting plan that you had very little say in or very little understanding about why it is what it is. That can make it very difficult to follow when things don't go well or smoothly in the future. So I
You know,
really
even
encourage.
saying difficult to follow, but also even going further than that, it seems that there's less issues with respect to enforcement or need to enforce a parenting plan when something has been done by, you know, by both of you, and it's something that you've agreed on. There's less likelihood that you're willing you that you don't follow it if you've created it yourself.
Stephanie's bringing up something so very important, which is the
Mhm.
conflict after the divorce. You know, for some parents, they understand the conflict before the divorce because that's, well, in part what led to
Mhm.
our decision to not stay married.
Yeah.
And there's often conflict during a divorce. Stephanie and I are very aware of that and used to assisting parents with that conflict in the best way possible. A poorly written parenting plan is going to result in conflict after divorce. And that's what we really want to avoid. Our children don't need their childhoods informed by parents who are fighting or arguing about how to simply take a summer vacation because the parenting plan provides such poor guidance. So
Mhm.
again, these are the rules for the road or the rules of the game. It's the structure. It gives you a place to fall back on when you're not in agreement and when you've done that together and you say, okay, we agreed you could take 2 weeks vacation with the kids. And oh, I got to tell you right now, I don't like that, but I agreed to it. We know it's developmentally appropriate. It's hard. I'm going to miss the kids. But you know what? I want you to have a good time.
Mhm.
That's a very different way to work out how to do a summer vacation, right?
Mhm.
If we've been through all those paces, that's how we get there.
Mhm. And creating a parenting plan can be so difficult, but as you say, it is so critical to the effective co-parenting of children when in two homes. You know, parents, of course, they always want to do what's best for children as they go through their divorce. So, what do we do when parents can't agree on what is best for the children as far as when they're creating their plan?
That's such an important question. I sometimes have to ask parents once we're working together that they don't ever use the term, I'm operating in the best interest of the children and you're not. I'm going to tell you why.
Mhm.
What's in the best interest of children is that parents learn to work well together. That is absolutely your highest bar. That is your absolute number one goal, is that no matter what, you and I are going to learn to work together and solve problems together. That's what's in your children's best interest. So turning it into a competitive relationship, like I do what's best for the kids and you don't, now we're starting to look at winners and losers or stack ranking parenting. That's not what's best for children. What's
Mhm.
best for children is that if I'm really good at something, perhaps you can acknowledge that. And the things that you're really good at, I'm going to acknowledge. But at the end of the day, What kids need are two good enough parents, not perfect parents, by the way. There are
Mhm.
two parents on this call right here. And I'm here to tell you right now, neither one of us are or were perfect.
Oh, wait a
So
second.
I know,
I'm just
I know.
kidding.
Do you believe I just came right out and said
Wait.
that? So we're not looking for perfect parents or the best parent. We're
Mhm.
looking for two good enough parents
Yes.
who have the will to learn the skills and the desire to do what's
Mhm.
best for their kids, which is to learn how to co-parent. That's what's best for kids.
Mhm.
So we can argue about, well, I think it's in the best interest of the kids if they stay in the same house during the school week from, Sunday until Thursday, and then you can have the kids on Friday and Saturday and hamburgers on Wednesday. We can have that conversation, and trust me, I have that conversation often. That is an
Mhm.
opinion that isn't supported by research. And so when we work together with people who are informed about the research, who know what's developmentally appropriate for children, we can get really good information, right? About, in fact, when we look at children who've grown up in two home families, they're now adults. What do they look back and tell us was most important? I'm going to give you a secret. They say, I had a strong and engaged relationship with both my parents. They were able to talk about us. They solved problems in a timely fashion.
Mhm.
We were able to do many of the things that were important to us. Not all of them. Things, of course, changed after the divorce, but they always made sure I could take a soccer class. That's what's important to kids.
Mhm.
So sometimes we get all wrapped around the axle about this is what's best for kids and that's what's best for kids. Truth be told, what's best for kids is for you and I to learn to work together.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Which, when we talk about a child-centered parenting plan, building off of this last question, um, what is what is how does a child-centered parenting plan differ from just a regular old parenting plan?
I love that question. So the court system in our laws, and I can't speak for Canada, but I can speak for here in the States and specifically Washington State. A lot of the outcomes of the court system are based on parental rights. They're based on adult rights. And when we apply adult rights to a parenting plan, I have a right to see I have a right to do fill in the blank. Okay. When we apply adult rights, we often sub-optimize what's best for kids. And we don't do that intentionally. It's just that if we've got to choose between parental rights and what's best for kids, that can get a little confusing. And sometimes the courts aren't quite sure what to do with that. We can sidestep that whole issue when we're working together in a coaching and mediating or collaborative law context, because
Mhm.
then we can just simply have a conversation. Who are your children? What are their ages? What are their temperaments? What are their needs? Who are you as parents? What are your strengths? What's your work schedule look like? We can take all of those aspects of family life across two homes, and we can now weave all those puzzle pieces together. We can move them around on the
Yes.
table until we all look at it and go, whoa, that's really is what would be best for Madison or for Tyler or for Siobhan. It doesn't matter. But when we land, we all go,
Mhm.
that really does make sense right now. He's
Mhm.
only 4. She's only 6. She's 14. I want her to go to boarding school. Okay, no, we're not going to say that about our 14-year-olds. Anybody who's been raising one knows that can be tough, particularly during a divorce. So we've got to be able to look at it through what are their developmental needs and how are we best going to meet those?
Mhm, mhm. And it's interesting. I'll tell a really quick story. I know, thinking about being child-centered, I'll use the example of activities. I had a set of clients where the child was in hockey throughout the winter,
Great.
and in a week alternating parenting schedule. And the mom was very much in favor of the child doing hockey, and the child really loved doing hockey. And of course, hockey is a team sport, and so the attendance at hockey, it's really, of course, important so that the team can
Rigorous.
continue. And the dad wasn't as much in favor of hockey. The dad, in fact, says, on my winter weekends, or my time with our child or children, I'd really like to spend that time going snowmobiling or doing things that I prefer to do. And so it became a real struggle because the parents really had a hard time with figuring out, are we going to, on the one hand, try to get an exception where our child doesn't have to go to hockey on the alternating week, so they only have to go once every 2 weeks during the mom's parenting time. Or are we going to make sure that this child is able to participate in hockey, whether the child is at mom's house or dad's house? And so they made a child-centered plan where it focused on what the needs of the child would be and the best situation for the child in attending hockey in both of those weeks. And then dad just had to make arrangements to do, snowmobiling or other activities during other times, because it would have really detrimented the child and the team and the team mentality if the child hadn't been able to go to hockey on the odd weeks or on the weeks with dad.
Such a perfect example. And don't we
Yeah.
have that with our skiers? And so it's very similar. And oftentimes when parents have an every other weekend schedule, one of the things that we'll do, and that's very child-centered, is to say during ski season for the 8 weeks of ski lessons, and let's just say mom's the skier and dad's not. Similar, I guess, in this situation, mom was really in favor of hockey, dad not so much. We might see for those weekends for that 8 weeks, you know what? We're going to change up the schedule enough that mom has all the Saturdays. She'll be responsible for the to and from of the ski lessons. And dad's going to have all the Sundays. In this case, he could go snowmobiling every Sunday. Well, that seems like another way to feed two birds from one feeder. And when you're working in a mediation or coaching situation or collaborative law, these kinds of options become obvious and commonplace, where we don't get stuck on, but that's not the schedule. It's like, okay. And your point, you have this beautiful child who would benefit from tobogganing or snowmobiling, as well as he loves skiing or skating.
Yeah.
So how are we going to do that? This is called we're always good parents first, and we're living across two households second. Good parents first. That
Yeah.
is our commitment to our child.
Yeah, and it's interesting. These are the kinds of things that come up often over time. When a family is developing a parenting plan, it may be that these kind of issues may not be at the surface, but over time, these little things pop up. And when we go back to the topic around why is it important to use mediation or out of court approaches, so often what we're able to do is to create skills for families as they're going through developing the first instance or the first iteration, first draft of that parenting plan. And what our hope is for parents over time to have those skills so that when 6 or 8 months later, when the ski season comes up and we want to register the child, the parents are able to actually do that kind of dispute resolution and figure out their own creative solution using the skills that we've been able to teach them in the mediation process.
100%. And one of the things, and Stephanie, you know this, that I build into almost every parenting plan are 3 times a year a business meeting. Basically, the CEOs, the co-parent executive officers, that's how I refer to co-parents. You're the executive officers of your children's lives now. You've got quite a company to run, probably the most important work you'll ever do. You're also, by the way, co-parenting financial officers as well. That means that you make sure that the money that's needed to help your children grow up smoothly is also available and handled in a fiscally, you have a good credit rating with one another, in other words. That being said, 3 times a year, my co-parents typically gather. And sometimes they do it, especially in that first year, They might do it with support. They might come back into my office or on Zoom as we're doing now, and we'll walk through one of those first, one or two of those big co-parent planning meetings, just to reinforce and get that muscle memory about, hey, this is what came up, and we're a little unsure about how the best way to resolve it. Okay, great. Let's do that. Let's practice, right?
Yeah.
And that way, then for the next 12 years of active co parenting together, which, if you've got a 6-year-old, that's another 12 years of active co parenting. Now, you'll be co parents for the rest of your life till death do you part. But the active co parenting underneath the auspices of a parenting plan is typically going to complete at age 18 or when a child graduates from high school. At least that's how it is here in Washington state. So we've got some time together. We might as well figure this out because it's a route of no escape if we're going to take good care of kids.
Mhm. And helping parents to build those skills is so critical, so that whether it's these bigger meetings, the 3 times a year, or the business meetings, or whether it's a one-off something here, there, or elsewhere, what we're really trying to do is to, by giving parents or teaching parents these skills, what we're then trying to do is to help to reduce the conflict between the parents, because every little issue that comes up, if it results in conflict, that's what can be harmful for children. But the regular business of co-parenting and working out these things, we can really help parents to give them those skills to make it better and easier and more flexible as they go forward.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Now, I will tell you a little vignette here. I had a mama and a daddy who had an 8-year-old girl who had been a soccer player. Don't know how much soccer or football is really popular where you guys are, but I will tell you it's big here in Washington. And so dad had been a soccer player and, of course, just absolutely adored that his 8-year-old daughter was following in his footsteps. And she appeared to absolutely love being out on the field. But when she was with mama, she cried and got anxious, and she didn't want to go to soccer, and she said, I don't like soccer and I don't want to play soccer. And so when mama and dad tried to have that conversation, it was like they were talking about two different children. And this was really, really troubling because it was clear that the 8-year-old was having a wonderful time with dada when she was
Mm.
off playing soccer on his weeks, and that she was absolutely falling apart with mom. And I just want to reassure you that even in those situations, we have our people, we have child specialists, we have someone who can sit down with that little one and talk about what was really on her heart. And here's what we learned. She was 8, okay? She absolutely loved playing soccer. She didn't like the competition, and she didn't like getting hurt. She didn't like getting banged into. She didn't like getting hit with the ball. And so what she was trying to tell her mom was, I'm in over my head. I love soccer. I love to please my father, which she did. And it's too much. And it was with bringing in a child specialist who could just sit with that little one and wonder out loud about the things that were wonderful and the things that were hard, that then we could talk with the parents. And you know what they did is they just lowered the competition a notch. We just got out of the select situation. We got into community soccer. We made sure it was fun. She can always re-engage at select level at age 12. So
Mhm.
again, if even when we're struggling and we start to feel like we're talking about two different children, we're here to help. We're here to help you get to a place where you're raising your children skillfully across two homes.
Mhm. And taking that example even one step further, if parents didn't have a manageable and effective relationship to communicate about this particular issue, it could have really pitted the parents against each other. But
Right.
instead, in that example, the parents were able to come together and to say, it's not, mom could have very well said, oh, dad, you're forcing her to go into soccer. And dad could have very well said, oh, mom, you're poisoning her mind. But at the end of the day, when we take that child-centered approach, and where we truly believe that the parents are not at odds against each other, and they really are trying to work in the best interests of the children, or in a child-centered way, better put, of course, the we can really find out really what's going on. And as you said, then the daughter gets to continue to play soccer, because it really, what she really did like soccer, and it was something else about soccer that was really not hitting her right.
Exactly, exactly. Sometimes I have to say to parents, I want you to remember the story of the opposite ends of the elephant, because oftentimes our children give us the end of the elephant of themselves that they want to share with us. And so sometimes they're showing daddy the back end of the elephant, and there's this beautiful tail and these nice strong thighs and big clumpy, back legs. And dad's really clear about what he's seeing. And then she goes to mama's, and she's got the trunk swinging and the big ears, and they're just trying to describe the same child to one another, and they're not talking the same language at all. And I'll say to them, it's the opposite ends of the elephant. She's showing you really important sides of herself. She's just showing you different sides. So I
Mhm.
want the two of you to always hear those stories as the complete picture. So she's this and that, and oftentimes so much more. But it's really easy to forget that sometimes our kids bring us what they want to bring us, and that's not always what they bring the other. So just
Very
these are all
true.
tricks of the trade.
Yeah. And it's that skill building that can help parents to realize that we're in this together, and we're co-parenting together. And let's
Right,
just work that out and see what we can best do for our children.
right.
Let's talk about go even a little bit deeper. You talked a little bit about a developmental approach to a parenting plan a few moments ago. Can we go a little bit deeper into what does that really mean when we're looking at a developmental um, uh, um, focus to building that effective co-parenting relationship?
Right. So, one of the things that we know, and there's a number of things that we know, and one is that children really benefit from a strong and engaged relationship with both of their parents. The question for a parenting plan when we're developing a developmentally appropriate child centered parenting plan is, what does that mean? What's the best way for that to happen? Right? We
Mhm.
have 3 years, the first 3 years of life, so birth to age 3, we call those the vulnerable years. And oftentimes there's just a lot of debate about whether a baby or a young toddler can have overnights with both their parents in separate homes. I will tell you what the research says, and this might be a little shocking, but the answer is, oh, yes, they can. Perfectly appropriate, as long as now we get into the developmentally appropriate things, as long as there's a secure attachment and that parents have a certain parenting skill set, whether they're sleeping at mommy's house or daddy's house is not what's important. Now, what becomes developmentally appropriate is how long those separations are. In other words, if I have a 1-year old, they're not separated from either parent for more than one overnight. We can do that safely, back and forth, and take really, really good care of that little up and walking toddler, right? So, developmentally appropriate means we understand the emotional and psychological development of a child, and we understand how that interacts with their connections with their secure attachment people, typically both of their parents, mom and mom, dad and dad, mom and dad, doesn't matter. Could also include a grandparent, by the way. We can have more than one secure attachment.
Mhm.
So we have this information. We share this with parents so that they can realistically figure out what's going to make sense for them. Now, interestingly enough, let's fast forward. Maybe we're getting divorced and we have a 4-year-old who's in a full blown daddy, daddy, daddy phase. Full blown. Daddy's everything. Daddy's my world phase, which sometimes a 4-year-old can go through, right?
Mhm.
Because kids go through phases. Well, we want to pay attention to that phase as we're adjusting to two-home family life. We want to make sure that that little one gets some of those daddy needs met. And maybe that's not exactly balanced. Maybe that's not exactly 50-50, but we're listening, we're paying attention, right? Because in a few years that might reverse itself and that little one might be in a mommy phase. But guess what? By then, that little one will have adjusted to two-home family life. So we're talking through how best to do it, where to make adjustments so a child's needs are getting met, their developmentally appropriate needs are getting met. Now I want you to jump forward to someone who's 16. Okay? You have a 16-year-old, you're deciding to get divorced, and your 16-year-old looks at you and says, I'm not going back and forth between two homes. Forget it. I'm too busy. I've got cheer practice. I'm on the volleyball team. I have 3 AP classes, and I'm not doing it. Anybody tried to make a 16-year-old do something that, they're not going to do? Because that seems a little fruitless. So now I'm sitting with a set of parents, one of whom might be living in the family home or continuing to live in that home where that child maybe's lived for the last 5, 10, 15 years. And I'm saying, okay, how do we do a strong and engaged relationship with a 16-year-old who you have to be so proud of? Look who you've raised. Look what you've done together so far. It's an amazing young woman, but she doesn't want to move back and forth. So how are we going to do that? If we look at it through a parental rights lens, the courts, both parents are going to have time. There's going to be a residential schedule. That's going to be dictated from the court to move back and forth. Why would we do that? Why would we put a child through that when there's lots and lots of ways up that mountain that will result in a very skilled and wonderful, and a child who will look back and say, I'm so thankful that you two continued to support me, even though you got divorced when I was a junior in high school, right?
It's interesting. I want to distinguish when you're talking about the time that that teenager goes between the two homes is so greatly distinguished from the quality of the parent-child relationship that can be built, irrespective of the amount of time that is spent with both parents. I use the example often where I grew up in Vancouver, British Columbia, a suburb off of Vancouver, British Columbia called Richmond, and I had a set of grandparents that were right next door in Vancouver, who I could see really anytime we wanted. It was a 20-minute drive down the street. And we had a set of grandparents who were down in California. And of course, it was in the time when there was no FaceTime and there was no Zoom and those sorts of things. And there was the good old telephone. And I can reflect for you that my relationship with my grandparents, who were 20 minutes down the road, and my relationship with my grandparents, who were down in California, a flight away, was just as strong. And so I found ways to be able to strengthen that relationship without necessarily being able to spend that in-person time with both sets of my grandparents. And it was about my willingness and my desire to create that relationship. And so when we think about that teenager can FaceTime and Zoom, video chat or text message with with each parent quite often. And the resentment is so much less because we're listening to how that child, from a developmental standpoint, what would be best for them developmentally.
Exactly. There's another piece to that. Your grandparents, boy, they just didn't miss a beat. They picked up that phone. They cleared their calendars for those visits. And that's the other thing when we're talking about a teenager. Listen, some teenagers are absolutely fine with going back and forth, and they, in their own little beings, they have a justice piece that says, this is going to be fair. You're both going to get half my time. This is how it's going to, they're like on the team, right? Week on, week off, or whatever the case may be. Some teenagers are mapped that way, right?
Mhm.
I'll tell you something. If we don't join them in their lives, that's all going to fall apart.
Mhm.
They don't want us moving 30 minutes away from all their friends and expect them to come and spend that week with us with us. Teenagers don't want the center of the world to be their parents. They want their parents. They need their parents. They need that connection. But
Mhm.
goodness knows the center of their world is school and academics and their sports or their clubs or their whatever, that
Right.
is important to them. And as your grandparents did, they knew how to join you in your life as much as you reached out to them to share your life with them.
Mhm. Mhm. Let's talk for a moment about these books that you've authored, Karen. You've authored 4 books, and I've read every one of them. They're amazing, and we have all of them in our book library here within our e-learning community. They're also linked right underneath this interview to our book library so that you can check them out. They're all focused around how to create that effective two-home family. So some of them have to do with building a parenting plan, a co-parenting plan, and one of them in particular has to do with how to create a step family. Thinking about the co-parenting ones, one of the things that really strikes me is that all of the things that you're talking about here today, being child-centered, developmentally appropriate, you really put pen to paper there, where you're describing how can you do that. You even describe some clauses that you can put into parenting plans that really represent and solidify what this means to be child-centered and developmentally appropriate. Can you talk a little bit about your books?
You bet. You bet. It sounds like you might be describing the Parenting Plan Workbook, which was written with attorney Felicia Malsby Soleil. She and I put our heads together, a mental health professional and attorney, to talk about what belongs in a strong and well designed parenting plan anywhere. We have contributors from 5 countries around the world who really helped us stay child focused and also really family focused. It's interesting. I want to make sure that as you're listening, this isn't about everything being about kids. This is really everything being about all of us. Like being on the airplane, and you have to put your own oxygen mask on first. That's part of this, is knowing, how can we do this? How can I maintain my work life and
Mhm.
be the best parent I can be? Both are important, right? So it considers all of that. Anyway,
Mhm.
the parenting plan workbook. So we put that together and describes the sections of a parenting plan, whether you're in Ireland or Australia, Canada, US, Great Britain, it doesn't
Mhm.
matter. Kids are kids everywhere on the planet. So even if the sections look a little different in your jurisdiction, the content is relevant. And as Stephanie pointed out, there literally are suggestions for, do we want to follow these rules? Here are the rules that can really make a difference. Let me give you an example. We will never disparage one another to anyone, but in particular to our children or in front of our children. That's
Mhm.
really important for kids. Our personal
Mhm.
feelings about each other as intimate partners are now history. They're not relevant anymore and don't need to be spoken about. So, a rule for the road: we will never disparage one another in front of our children or to our children. That's a gift. That's a gift you want to give your kids. So, there are a number of things like that in the parenting plan workbook. And then Felicia and I, after we wrote it, we thought, oh, you know what? Let's do a set of videos and we'll talk people through
Mhm.
it, right? So on my YouTube page, completely free, are about 4 hours. There are, I think, 16 videos, I believe. And they walk you through how to think about building that parenting plan. So there's
Mhm.
lots of resources out there. Um,
Mhm.
that's one of the books. The other one, the co-parenting handbook, is what I would recommend to anybody who's thinking about separating, because it takes you from moment one, we're going to separate. It takes you from moment one and walks you all the way through to stability in two homes. And it literally gives you what you might say to kids, or how to field their questions, how to support them emotionally, how to do the work you need to do as you let go of your intimate partner relationship that's coming to a close. How do you strengthen your parenting relationship with one another, right? Because that's what kids need. That's the co-parenting handbook. Yeah.
Yes, they're very helpful, and all of them really go together to support in a very solid way, the from the moment of separation through children's childhood and even beyond. And so I certainly encourage our viewers to take a look at those books. We've got links in our book library to Amazon Canada and Amazon US, so that you can have a bit better of a look and a look at the synopsis in Amazon. So, we also have for the Step Families Handbook, we actually have a book club video that we've also done, which actually discusses that book. So feel free to check that out if it's something that you might be interested in. That
Yeah.
book club
This
was so
this
much fun.
I know, right? This and the thing about the Step Family Handbook is that it was just the natural progression of, parents separating, divorcing, getting stable in two homes, and then falling in love again. And oh my goodness, now what do? I've met someone. And the book starts right there. I've met someone. It starts
Mhm.
right there. Even though it's called the Step Family Handbook, it starts right at the
Starts
very
from
beginning.
dating.
It
Mhm.
starts with dating. And so, how do we do that in the most skillful way? Again, to make sure that we're successful. These are books that are all about helping families stay safe, secure, and successful as they continue to raise children, whether it's across one home or two. That's what they're about.
Yeah. And that's why we're so very thankful, Karen, for you joining us as a contributor on our Up and Notch Learning platform. Not only we have books in your books in our book library, we've got our book club on the Step Families Handbook. We've got this interview, and we're so very grateful to have you because your philosophy about how to help parents post separation is right in line with what we're really trying to do here at Up a Notch Learning, which is to create a positive and constructive set of tools and skill building opportunities for parents as they move forward into two homes.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I just want to say I've had a chance to wander around Up a Notch myself. For all the listeners, please, please, please take a minute, do that little easy registration that gives you access to some incredibly valuable resources. If you're thinking about separating, you're already separated, maybe you have a parenting plan, but you're kind of struggling a little bit.
Mhm.
Lots of resources, and very much worth your time.
Yeah. So I want to finish off today's interview with my very favorite part of every interview, which is our top 3 tips. So, Karen, if you can give us your top 3 tips for what parents should really be considering. I mean, we've had taken half an hour to talk about what they should be considering as far as parenting plans, but let's summarize it in your top 3 tips for what parents should consider as they go forward in building their own parenting plan.
First and foremost, your children need you both. You're falling apart, your marriage is coming to a close. I get it. This is tough, but I want you to my top tip is to know that your children actually need you both. If you're capable of being a good enough parent, then you're designing a parenting plan that really reflects that, because you want to raise healthy kids, and those are correlated, okay? A strong and engaged relationship with both good enough parents is correlated with raising healthy kids. That's number one.
Mhm.
Number two, as much as you may want to save money and do things on your own, I'm in full support of self determination and empowerment. But this is a time to use experts as appropriate. Even if you're going to do a kitchen table parenting plan, I want you to set that in front of someone who does this every day and who
Mhm.
can help you anticipate places where you didn't know what you didn't know. Okay. There are lots of things. You've never done this before. I've done over 1,000 parenting plans. So whether it's me or Stephanie or someone like us, you're going to sit down with someone to say, how did we do? Not because we need to be evaluated, but because we want to get it right, right? I'll give you an example. The set of parents who came to me because they had a set of 3-year-old twins who were absolutely struggling in school post-divorce. And the kids were just getting worse and worse and worse, and they didn't understand what was wrong. They were so proud of themselves. They came in and said, we figured out the residential schedule. We've done so much. The kids are moving back and forth, week on, week off with each of us. And I sat back in my chair and I went, they're 3. They're just 3. They're sideways. They miss you both deeply. They can't possibly be ricocheting back and forth. They didn't know what they didn't know. They didn't do that thinking that it would be anything but good. It was lots less transitions, and the kids love both of their parents. Well, it's not how it works when you're 3. So you can't know what you don't know. So number 2, use your experts so that you make sure your T's are crossed, I's are dotted, and that you've accomplished what you actually want to accomplish. Okay. The third one is to get help post decree when you hit a stuck place. Don't dig a hole of conflict to China. Please don't dig deep down into the center of the earth before you reach out for help. We're here. Stephanie's here. I'm here. People like us all across Canada and the US are here. We will help you. It's easier to help before you dig the hole too deep. So reach out sooner, not later, and we'll help you get out of the mess back into raising healthy, resilient kids.
And just to expand on that third point just a little bit, it can be really difficult because when you're creating the parenting plan in the first instance, you may not have certain issues that are on your plate. So, for example, your children might be very young, and they might not even be in any activities. And it might be that the activity question or the activity conversation between the parents doesn't come up for 2 or 3 years. And so sometimes it's hard to have that conversation in the first instance, but it's really important that as your children grow and develop, and as more issues surface, is really to make sure that you've got an effective way to resolve your disputes, or effective way to, even before they become a dispute, effective way to have those conversations in a way that doesn't create more conflict, as you're saying, Karen.
100%. By the way, I'm going to put a fourth one in there because this is big. Families can do really, really well post decree until, guess what? I'm falling in love. And so that's another time to just know that when there's another adult who might be potentially joining a family system, it's another time that you may want to reach out and you may want to get some support about how to do this well. Because no matter what, if I remarry, if Stephanie's my co-parent, it's always Stephanie and me. That's who's going to be raising our kids. We're the decision makers. We got the bottom line on our children. But if my partner's coming in, we need to know how to do that dance now with 3 adults involved in children's lives. So that's often another time to reach out.
Absolutely. Well, Karen, thank you so much for all of your expertise and your thoughts today. It will be so valuable for families as they're getting into their transition, going on to their journey, moving into 2 homes, and them trying to navigate how to create that effective parenting plan going forward. So thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely my pleasure, Stephanie, always. And wishing everybody the best. Don't hesitate to ever email or reach out. We're both there. There's lots of us. We know how to do referrals. So get the support you need.
Yes, thank you so much.